The quest to improve as an artist or designer, we need to take an objective, or as an objective as possible, look at our work and also the work of others. We are constantly observing and forming opinions, assessing the value, seeking to understand what we see. Designers, illustrators, photographers, artists of all types use critique to learn from others, but also to evaluate the worth and the success of their own work. We get better at critique the more we do it. In a class situation, whether you're an exhibiting artist or a designer who is serving clients or a creativepreneur who's making and selling product, your work is going to be evaluated. Your clients, your customers will form an opinion of your work and take action based on that opinion. Their opinions may be informed or they may not be. The thing that you want to do is to create the highest quality, most excellent work you possibly can. And one of the most valuable skills you can learn as a creative is how to critique, both to give critique and to receive it. So that's what we're all about in this presentation. So critique is a skill, it's a vital skill for any artist or designer. It's something you become better at the more you do it. And critique is integral. It is foundational to improving your work. And critique is appropriate at any stage of your creative development, whether you're starting out, whether you consider yourself adept, or whether you consider yourself a master. So what is critique? It is careful observation and analysis of our work. And what you want to look at with critique is the purpose of the design or the problem that it's meant to solve, the need that it's supposed to fill. You want to look at how the design elements and principles such as balance and texture and rhythm and focal point and emphasis and framing. What's the hierarchy? What is the structure? You want to look at all of these elements and principles because they work together to present the whole thing visually. You can't have anything existing that we see, anything visual, without these elements and principles in place. And we also want to look at cultural reference, historic reference, because we don't design in a vacuum. We don't design out of nothing. Design is the result of assimilation of knowledge and experience. So in terms of purpose, we can look at this. On the left, we have an image of a Rembrandt, and this particular artwork is hanging at the Getty Center in West Los Angeles. And on the right, we have a parody by Rodney Pike done in Photoshop where Rowan Atkinson has been superimposed. The purpose of Rodney Pike's work is parody. The purpose of Rembrandt's work, this is evidently an image of his father, so he represented his father in military garb of the day. And we can see that there's light logic, there's light and shadow. We can see there's color and texture. We can see that the anatomy of the man's face is in the general accepted proportions for a human face. We can see value. We see light areas and we see dark areas. And we see how the light areas emerge against the darker areas and the dark areas emerge against the light areas. These are two student solutions to an assignment in my two-dimensional design class dealing with pattern and rhythm and texture. One based on the creative brief is far more successful than the other. Both of them deal with the exact same design principles, dealing with repetition, rhythm, two-dimensional space, color, and other concerns. So in evaluating these, we would look at these in terms of what the creative brief was requiring. There's size, there's proportion, there are results that need to be achieved. And are the designs successful in accomplishing everything that the design brief requires? It helps to know history sometimes in order to understand the point of a current work. So neither of these are at this time current, but we can see that the Muhammad Ali Esquire cover by George Lois drew from Botticelli's Saint Sebastian. And so that kind of context becomes part of the critique. How effective is the Esquire cover given the audience of the magazine and their level of understanding of historic context? When you critique, you're looking at what is working, what doesn't work, how things can be improved, and all in the idea of what the design or the piece of art is meant to do. With that understanding, you cannot have the exact same criteria for everything you critique. Certainly, you can critique everything visual in terms of aesthetic principles, color, balance, scale, shape, line, proportion, and things like that. There are certain things that generally go into a critique of anything, and we're going to look at those. We're going to run through those. So you always want to evaluate something within the framework of what it is meant to do. What's the expected result of the work, and does the work achieve that purpose? So if you're designing a chair that is meant for human beings to sit in, and you design the chair so that it's not comfortable to sit on or in, or it falls apart when weight is placed on it, you're going to get an unfavorable critique because the function isn't met. If we look at the FedEx logo in relation to the cover design, they're very different criteria, so we cannot critique the FedEx logo completely in the same way that we can critique the cover design, because the FedEx logo has a different purpose. There are things that are in common, and certainly, again, we can talk about color and shape and positive and negative space and things like that, but we can't critique on the success of either of these designs in exactly the same way when we're talking about the purpose, because the purpose of a logo is different than the purpose of a book cover. So we have to look at what's the purpose, what makes the work effective. So let's go back to the FedEx logo, and we see, if you're not aware, it used to be called Federal Express, and that was the long-standing logo, and there's a diagonal motion to that. The type is uppercase, it's easy to read. It made a good vehicle graphic and airplane graphic. The focus is on express. And so the original 1973 logo represented the idea of things taking off, becoming, shall we say, airborne. There's a movement, diagonal movement, which indicates speed. There's the use of the red and the blue and the white. So the redesign capitalized on the shortening of the name, just like International Business Machines was shortened to IBM, and Hewlett-Packard was shortened to HP, and United Parcel Service was shortened to UPS. And what also the designer did was used opposing warm, cool colors, reminiscent of the earlier logo, but instead of being all uppercase and a somewhat stylized sans serif face that had a lot of complexity, the designer chose a more common sans serif. And instead of the diagonal, we now have an arrow involved, and the arrow is in the negative space. And the arrow is directional. It points to movement. It points to originating here and going there. And then the colors were updated more recently. So the current logo is less visually complex than the original. A lot of the same ideas are involved. Is it an effective logo? Yes. Now, to understand how design elements and principles work, you do have to understand the elements and principles, the design theory or aesthetic theory that is common to all visual art and design. It's called the visual language or the form language. If you don't know what these are, you still see them every day because you can't see anything without these things in operation. But if you do know them, if you've studied them, do they work together to support the function? Again, this is a form and function idea. And in what way do they work together? Is there anything that is not working? Is there anything that shouldn't be there? At first glance, this is a painting of 3 horses. The title of this piece is Primary Colors, so we have 3 horses, each one depicted in the subtractive primaries red, yellow, blue. So these are horses of a different color, if you will. And it's interesting to note that not only are the horses red, yellow, blue, but red, yellow, blue are incorporated into the background, so the whole image is about the 3 primary colors. Is there anything here that doesn't work? Is there anything here that doesn't unify, that's not necessary? There's a strong diagonal from the blue horse to the yellow horse. There's an opposing diagonal in the hills. There's a diagonal movement this way. There's a lot of light and shadow. There's a lot of light logic going on. The horses are somewhat realistic, but not fully. So then we want to look at Are there any confusing things about the work? Are there too many different ideas? Or is one idea very clearly stated? Can anything be removed from the work without affecting the function? Is there enough involved? If there is there enough included that we understand the form and the function of the work? So this is a portrait by Grant Wood, who is the artist behind American Gothic. He is an American regionalist. And what we see here is a lot of red and yellow and blue. We see obviously an anatomically correct face of a young boy, and he's wearing a plaid sweater. Is there anything here that doesn't belong? There's a lot of repetition of pattern. We have the pattern in the tree. We have the pattern in the sweater. We have the pattern in the background on the right. There's a pattern in the hair. What about the leaves? Do they make sense? If they were removed, would the painting seem balanced and complete? The leaves actually help reference the tree in the background. And so there's a relationship between the foreground and the background. What about craftsmanship and refinement? Is the design elegant? The thing about this idea is that craftsmanship is so important. Standards are high. And if things are poorly put together, or they seem lazy, or there is lack of attention to detail, the value of the work can be greatly reduced. So if you are striving to be a master designer, photographer, or artist, the detail, the care of the execution of your work is going to be hugely important because that adds value. So this is an earlier logo and the current logo for this business. We can see that the execution on the left is a lot more complicated and actually impacts the readability and the legibility of the business name, and that's a problem. We also see there's a lot of drop shadow. There's some outlines. There's different colors, different treatments going on. There's things that just don't work together well. And then we might have to question the blue-violet that's in the precision. It is behind the water droplet, but the water droplet gets fairly complex. This needed editing. The current logo is on the right. We can see that it is a lot simpler. It works in a single color, the blue against the white background. It makes more sense. We've lost the drop shadow. We can read the typography. Is it the best logo ever? Can it still be simplified? Yes, because a logo is not a sign, it's not a brochure, and it's not a business card. So it still has a ways to go in terms of being a really strong, stellar, excellent piece of identity design for a business, but it's much improved over the original idea. Does the work meet the physical and scheduling requirements of the creative brief? If something is not the right size, if it doesn't fit, it's a failure. If it doesn't function well, it can look good, but if it doesn't function well, it's a failure. It can function okay, but not be visually appealing, and that's also a detriment. So especially with design, there are physical criteria that have to be met. There are size, color requirements, technological requirements. There's a variety of things that have to be addressed beyond just what something looks like. So if you understand that aspect of the design, and this is where, client assessment and customer assessment are definitely going to come in. Is your website legible? Is there a clear call to action? Do I know what your business is all about when I arrive on your website? Do I know what to do when I arrive on your website, for example? What about receiving critique? The first criteria that you need to address for yourself when receiving critique is that you are not your work. So a discussion about your work is not a discussion about you personally. The merits of your work have little to do with your merits as a human being. Yes, your work is a product of you, but it's not you. And when your work's being critiqued, that doesn't mean that you're being critiqued. This is me. This is my work. I'm not my work. My work is not me. This is what I've produced. This is what I've created. I'm proud of it. When you present your work for evaluation by a customer or a client, it's a really good idea to be able to justify and back up your creative decisions. Tell people how you came to the design solution. What were your concerns? What were you trying to address in the design? And that helps you think things through again and understand in retrospect what it was you did and why. Give the same assignment to 10 different designers, 10 different artists, 10 different illustrators. You're going to get 10 entirely unique creations. This is the way we are all unique as human beings. We have so much in common, person to person, yet each of us is unique person to person. The same set of criteria given to different creatives, you're going to end up with that many different creative solutions. So you have to critique everything in the context of what that assignment is all about. Does it work? Does it fail? If it fails, why did it fail? If it works, why does it work? What can you improve in either case? What can you carry forward from the critique into your future work? That's the main thing. Critiques are part of your learning process. They're not showcases, and they're not competitions. If you don't understand something, ask. Don't just assume, don't let it sit there. During a critique or when somebody is giving you feedback, whether it's an instructor, whether it's a peer or colleague, whether it's a client or customer, ask questions. Asking questions based on what you've heard demonstrates that you've been listening. And listening is a design skill and part of the critique process. And if you disagree with the feedback, which is certainly your right, provide a reason why you disagree. Don't be afraid to defend your work. Along with that, I'm a strong proponent of never apologizing for your work, even if it's really not up to par. That also means that you put your best effort into everything you do, so you don't get lazy. You really do try to work through and press through and solve that problem to the best of your ability. And the more you work through and press through, the better you become. So the next time it's easier, and the time after that it's even easier. And you're building yourself up and edifying yourself creatively and in terms of technical skill and in terms of understanding, wisdom, knowledge, skill with every critique. One thing to keep in mind is that there are times where you have to filter things. You want to accept critique from people who have your best interests in mind. So when somebody is critiquing your work, what is their motive for the critique? The person you ask should represent the kind of critique you want. A client is not going to critique your work in the same way a design instructor would. A friend is not going to critique your work in the same way that a client would. So you have to filter and edit based on who is doing the critique. If your work is being critiqued on the basis of design principles and elements, then it should be done by somebody who knows what those are. Not all critique is useful or valid. And so you learn to filter and accept what's for your benefit and what's going to build you up and reject everything else. Where you can and where it's appropriate, take the feedback and make your work better. At least take it forward with you, even if you don't revise the work. You should always be critiquing your own work. So self-evaluation, self-reflection, as you're going through the creative process to bring something into being is crucial, especially if you're a designer, because you have to make sure you're on point and you're not getting off track with what the design is supposed to accomplish. You need to understand what your target is, what the function or the purpose of the design is. Why are you creating it in the first place? And are you heading toward that mark, or are you off course? Because if you're off course, you might create something that's beautiful, but it doesn't solve the problem. So make critique part of your creative process. Accept critique from people who know what they're talking about and have your best interest in mind. Evaluate your work in terms of the purpose of the work and the context. Use the critique feedback to improve. And remember that you are not your work. Thanks for watching. If you have questions or comments, drop them below.